Kicar.
Kicar, oh, I am probably good one.
It's just like it's spelled, right?
That was the second choice, wasn't it? Thank you for coming.
No, but thank you for inviting me. I was talking with Ed, trying to figure out where I missed this last year, and I just came to Louisiana in December of 19, and maybe maybe I missed the conference that year. Of course, 2020 is what it was. So just get this is kind of like an introduction, like you've never seen me before, and it's because you probably have never seen me before. So Chad Kicar, the state conservationist for NRCS here for Louisiana, and give you a little history. I was been here since December of 19. Just about 9 years before that, I was one of the assistant state conservationists for field operations in Oklahoma. I managed the eastern third of the state of Oklahoma, about 31 field offices there. Prior to that, I was a district conservationist in Hawaii on the island of Oahu. And then before that, I was in a couple of field offices in Texas. And so kind of, in light of who you are as the audience and an organization. So the thing that got me into NRCS, I was working for Dow Chemical, old Union Carbide plant down there in Victoria, Texas. And I've got my ag economics degree, Texas Tech, up in Lubbock. So I obviously had an interest in agriculture to get that kind of degree, and I'd always wanted to farm, but figured out that it was way too expensive to start farming from scratch. So I had the opportunity to start buying some cows, and so bought a few cows, rented 100 acres, started putting some cows on there, and then had the opportunity to buy a pretty big set of cows. Got about 70 head, and so rented some property, and that was December of '97 that I bought that big set. And the spring of '98 was when South Texas went through a pretty good drought. We essentially didn't have any rain from about February or March till August when we got a hurricane. So I started reading some articles in our local newspaper that were put out by our local soil water conservation district. And we had a retired NRCS man that was working for the conservation district, and he would write articles, and we were talking about doing what kind of that was when lick tubs were all the rage, and everybody had a lick tub. And so we were he'd talk about lick tubs and just protein, and what are those cows' requirements? What's that pasture condition look like right now during this drought? And feeding hay, and what kind of hay to feed, and what you need to supplement and all that. So I started going into the office there and talking to him. And we also had a grazing land, a GLCI, Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative. We had a GLCI coordinator in our office in Victoria, and so started using them. Started doing nut bow fecal samples, and they were through the conservation district and the NRCS. We talked about cross fencing and rotating cows, and using these fecal samples to talk about protein contents in the grass, and then what the cows needed at that particular stage of gestation or life cycle that they were in. And I was in the office one day, and I was like, "Man, you guys got a good job. You got any more of that like that?" And they said, "Yeah, maybe." And so, long story short, they hooked me up with the folks at the HR department, and I started, I quit my real job and went to work for NRCS. So worked in a couple offices there in Texas, and always have had that grazing background, that grazing focus. That livestock focus, and just some of that personal experience to rely on, and so I appreciate you letting me be here today. So kind of in that the where we are with NRCS right now. Told you where I am and where we are with NRCS. Talk about a little bit about COVID. We've gone for almost a year now. It was March 15th last year when we closed all of our doors to the public. We had a brief period during the summer and fall where we were, able to see a producer in an office, by appointment only, one at a time kind of thing with masks and a little social distancing. So, that was better than we went, with that surge that we had back in the fall. We kind of went backwards again, and so we went back to that no visitors in the office. So, hopefully the new administration is they kind of they're trying to get their feet on the ground with COVID, where we are as an agency and what we're doing, trying to follow the CDC guidance, and so we're waiting on what that new guidance is going to be. Shouldn't be terribly long, but the goal is we want to get back to what we used to call normal, and hopefully we're going to get back to that spot where if you're driving by the office and you need to come in and talk, you can just come in and talk. That's the ultimate goal. That's where we want to get to. The steps to get there are probably going to be that similar to what we saw this summer, where we're going to go to everybody back in the office, and then we're going to go to producers, call first, make an appointment, come in, visit for a little bit, do your business, get out, to wear the masks and all that good stuff. Then we've got to go through a couple of steps of that, and then we can get back to the open. As long as our general community, our regular community around us is in good shape with new cases and that kind of stuff. So it is certainly looking better. It's looking better, nationwide. Louisiana really didn't have, I'll call it a third surge. We were part of the first surge back in February, March, April. Then we caught a little surge in the summer, June, July, August kind of time frame. Then we caught another little surge there in the fall. But Louisiana did not do as bad as some other states like the Texas and Californias and some of those did. And so that's a good thing. So we're seeing a lot better results in that. People are getting vaccines now, so that's going to help. So, like I said, we're hoping to get back to that old normal that we were used to. Tell you a little bit about staffing, where we're at staffing wise. And part of my story was that I was able to go into an office, and I had a very experienced conservation district employee. I had an NRCS, GLCI coordinator. There was also a district conservationist in the office, and so staffing is important. And we have gone through a period. I'm hoping we're out of this period too, but we have gone through a period where through one thing and another, when President Trump came in, he froze all federal hiring. That put up, and then it was kind of slow to get started. Secretary Perdue said, "You can hire, but you got to prove to me that you really need the people," because they were concerned with federal federal employee, how many people working for the government. So we finally have gone through a couple of those hurdles, and today we're at a point that nationwide NRCS is trying to hire 1,500 people. Louisiana, I have my current approved request is 35, and I'm going to add another 10 or 12, 13 to that. So I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to hire close to 50 people. Last year, I hired, about 20 new employees, and 10 of them were soil cons in field offices. And so the biggest push that I'm trying to move on is soil conservationists. We've got a position called a natural resource manager, but it's going to be the same as a soil con, and range conservationists. So I've already got 3 range cons that we've offered the job to. Hopefully they will accept and want to move to Louisiana. But we've offered them a position. I'm going to advertise 1 more of those. So I am trying to build back our field office staffing levels and get it to a point where where we can service our customers, because you're our customers, and if I don't have people, I can't service you. That's what I want to get us back to as part of our normal as well, because and it takes time to train people, and you're always going to lose people. Last year I told you I hired 20 people, but at the same time I lost 20 people from all of 2020. I brought in 20 new people to Louisiana NRCS either from brand new hires never worked for us before or from other states. My head count at the end of the year was exactly the same as when I started, because people get jobs. They in other states with NRCS, they retire. They decide they don't they want to pursue other interests. Whatever the case is, attrition is always happening. I'm losing 3 people today, as a matter of fact. One's going to my friend and my brother, Mr. Craig McCain at FSA. Another is going somewhere else and to another agency. And so we just lose people all the time, and you just never know when one's going to pop up. So I'm hoping if I overstaff that I might when I get to lose a few people, I might be at a normal staff. But anyway. So another part of what we're doing in Louisiana NRCS is our structure, or the way we operate. And for 70 years we operated as one district conservationist in every field office in every parish in the state, and then we had staff under that district conservationist, and we saw after time that may be an older model that we're not gonna that's not as supportive of the customer service as we need it to be. So, and there's so much variability between people. So we've tried to we've kind of done the same thing as some other states, but we tried to create these teams or resource units. But and I could have brought a map with me, but I didn't. But we created this resource unit group, this team that will be headed by one district conservationist over multiple parishes, but then have these staffs underneath them. And hopefully the goal is to have the experienced, long time resource conservationists that can handle very complex conservation planning issues. Then you have your soil cons and your range cons that we're kind of always in that process of growing and training and bringing on new ones, and then they promote up. And then you have your soil conservation technicians as well that are kind of that stable base backbone, local folks, the boots on the ground kind of guys and gals that that are part of our agency. And then our conservation districts and district partners and district positions and district technicians and all the things that our partner organizations bring to us as well. So, and then that district conservationist that's over that whole team of people. My idea is now that person's resources have just multiplied from all I had was a technician and a district person. Now I've got 10 people, and so I can go and really hit some problem areas harder, faster. I can try to get the right people on the right land doing the right conservation planning, and so we're hoping, the goal is to get better ourselves, have that better customer service, have more people at that district conservationist disposal to go out and do the work that we need to do. Take some of the administrative burden off of those former district conservationists that, if you only had one person that's on one performance plan that you had to do once a year, it was inefficient. So hopefully we'll gain some efficiencies through some of these things, and like I said, put the right people out there doing the conservation planning and doing the job that we need them to do. So I want to give you a little idea of what our Farm Bill programs look like for this year, for 2021. Right now, we're in the process of completing the conservation stewardship renewal process. So the producers that had a conservation stewardship plan back from 2015 or 2016, those were, we started working with those folks almost a year ago, but those folks are eligible for a one-time renewal, and so they've applied for that process. We got about $7.8 million for renewals, but the competition for that, if anybody's got a CSP contract, competition for these programs is very high, because people see the value in some of the reimbursement money, but they see the value in the conservation as well. But the competition is high, so we had, somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 CSPs that were eligible for renewal, and we might get to fund 150 of them. And we even asked for and received an extra $1 million. So we're gonna be able to put about $8.8 million into CSP renewals. Right now we're having to sign up for just general CSP. So if you've never participated in CSP before, and you think you might be interested, now's the time to go get with your local office, find out, call them, email them. Can't just drop by, but find out how you can apply for the current conservation stewardship program, because we'll be working through that process later in the spring and through the summer to get those CSP contracts set and finalized. But right now we're looking at 300 plus stewardship applications, and again, it's about $7.8 million. That sounds like a lot of money. Any of us would love to win the lottery and get that check for $7.8 million. When you start spreading that between, number one, those CSP contracts, we put all 5 years worth of money into the bank for those payments. So that takes a pretty good chunk out of it. And the contract size makes for 100 or so, 125, maybe 150 if the total dollar amount on those is kind of small. So again, the competition is high. The old days of I'll just move my hay and my mineral feeders and I'll raise or I'll lower my spray boom, put some different nozzles on, and I'm good. I'm in the program. Those days are gone. We've got to get competitive. We've got to think outside the box. As a producer, what am I willing to do? Some of that, it sounds crazy to people. We're going to tell you to plant weeds. We're going to tell you to plant pollinator habitat. That some pollinator habitat is one of those things that we need. We need our pollinators, not just monarch butterflies, but every bee and moth and thing that pollinates flowers. But we need those insects. Mysteriously, those plants look like weeds, and we normally spray them, put some 2,4-D or some P+D on there, and we're good. But that's not where we want to go from a conservation side. So you got to think outside the box sometimes. Be willing to do some things that you don't normally think you want to do, and we're not going to ask you to do it on every acre either. And that's the nice part is. It may be a percentage of acres that we want to do something like pollinator habitat on. But anyway, so competition's high, but we're
I'll tell you, we are getting as much money as any other state in the country for stewardship program. So we're competing well with every other state. The South Dakotas, the North Dakotas, the Oklahomas. We're traditionally really big CSP states, and so we're getting as much money into Louisiana as they are. So that's a good thing. So that shows that we're getting those kind of funds from a national level. The 2017, we're always on this cycle. We're like a broken clock at least, but we're like a clock. We keep coming around to the same programs, the same kind of time frames. So the producers with a 2017 CSP contract, those are going to be eligible for renewal in 2022. So we start that process now and say, at least come in and sign up and say, it's kind of like raising your hand. Yes, I would like to renew my 2017 CSP contract. We're not going to do anything for a while, but it at least lets us know who's out there who wants to renew. And then later in the summer and fall, we'll get into that process of those. But anyway, so our big program that we probably get some of the most dollars for typically is going to be our EQIP program. A friend of mine always called it the Fix It program. That's where we try to go fix those problems or those resource concerns that you have on your land. Might be that that cross fence or that livestock water, might be that herbaceous weed control or brush management or something like that. So that's where we have the EQIP program to try to fix those resource concerns. Maybe even get to the point that we solve most of your problems with EQIP, and then you're a great candidate for CSP to go a step above and beyond. This year we got about $21 million in EQIP funding, and we are required to put about 50% of that into livestock or grazing type EQIP projects, and so you can figure that we'll have somewhere in the 10, 11, 12 million dollars that are going to be going towards livestock resource concerns. Back again, that's your livestock water, your herbaceous weeds, your brush species, and so trying to using cross fence to improve grazing management, those kind of things. So that's always a good thing. We want to put that money back into agriculture, and half of it, let's just say half of it going into cropland type concerns, or we're actually having to split that cropland money with forestry as well. So that's not even an even split there. So good to hear that that we're getting those kind of funds in. We're always going to be looking for more. We're probably going to ask for additional funds when they say some are available, and we'll try to get more funding in so that we can just fund a few more and a few more and a few more of these EQIP applications. We've got something new that's coming this year. This is out of the 2018 Farm Bill, and it is, if you remember back the conversations that Congress was having with the 2018 Farm Bill, the House wanted to do away with the CSP program altogether. The Senate wanted to keep the CSP program as a standalone program like it is now. So there was kind of a bit of a compromise. We got to keep CSP, standalone anyway, but they created the EQIP incentives program, and it's a minimum of a 5-year contract, but a maximum of a 10-year contract. You can do conservation practices in it. You can do CSP-like enhancements in it. And I view it, and the way we're at least going to start out with this in Louisiana is it's that long-term type, and I'm talking 5 to 7 years. You don't want to get too close to that 10-year range, but a 5 to 7 year project where I want to try to help somebody go from, what is maybe, a super intense operation to, installing, maybe a little more, call it conservation-minded, a little softer system. And, my big example is, the row crop guys. So, if you've got somebody that's conventionally tilling, corn, cotton, beans, and they're out there every year, they're tilling the soil hard, can we get that individual to convert to at a minimum, to a reduced tillage, but maybe just could we get them to convert to a no-till system? And then could we get them to incorporate cover crops into that system? And then could we get them to incorporate some type of conservation crop rotation? And those kind of things take time. And those kind of systems, you don't just switch overnight, and you don't just change your entire cropping system and land use. So it takes time to switch from a conventional tillage to a no tillage. It takes time to start incorporating cover crops in there and find what works for you and your land and your crop rotation. And can I incorporate something more than cotton on cotton on cotton? Can I mix in some other crops that'll then have a different effect on that soil health? And can I increase that soil organic matter? And can I increase the, they call it now, the words are, the resiliency to climate change. And so, can we take a system that takes time? And, even in a grazing system, can we take somebody that, that may be, very intensively utilizing, I use all the right words, can I take somebody that's intensively utilizing their pasture, and maybe it's, all open pasture and continuous graze, and, can we, convert that individual to, rotating those cows, installing cross fences, additional water systems, then, can we look at doing something, different on the land for a forage system? And, again, those things take time. You don't just do that in a 1-year equip contract, install some water and a cross fence, call it good, and walk away. So it takes time, and so that's what I envision this program looking like, is being able to work with a producer under one equip contract for a 5 to 7 year period. Always comes with a little danger to it, because things change so fast. In number one, in our lives, 2 years ago you weren't planning on a hurricane hitting, and that changed your operation overnight. And so, how do we deal with that? Just the changes that occur every year with land ownership and leasing and renting land and all those things. Things change, and so we got to work through that. That's okay. It's pretty flexible. We can deal with that. So that's kind of where we're at programmatically. I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't foresee any huge changes in funding for our Farm Bill programs, EQIP, CSB, those kind of things. What I do see, and I'll tell you this too, I've told some of the especially the row crop producers, is this administration is very keen on climate change. Whether you believe in climate change or not, I don't care. What I do know is that agriculture can sequester carbon in the soil, and magically it looks like soil organic matter. Magically, that also increases our water infiltration rates. Magically, it increases our water holding capacity in our soil, and magically it makes our soil healthier and able to take those 2-inch rains one afternoon and store it then for longer. If I can add 1% of organic matter into my soil, I can hold an inch of rainfall. If I can increase the infiltration rate of my soil and get that 1 inch that falls in an hour and a half into that soil, then I can hold on to it instead of having it run off. And I can use it when it dries back out again after that 1 inch rainfall. So if we can get some monetary compensation for agriculture building or sequestering carbon, but building that organic matter in the soil, then that's another incentive for producers to do something and make some of those changes. So that's my that's my very, very fuzzy crystal ball. Very little to base that on, but it's my crystal ball that I'm thinking, because people are talking about it more. And if you hear about this administration and all of the talk about climate change and what we're going to do with carbon sequestration, and I think some eyes are open in agricultural organizations, in the USDA, Secretary Vilsack. I think people are saying agriculture can be part of this, part of this solution. If we get in front of the train, we will not get run over by the train. If we wait for the train to pass over us, then it will be too late. So we've got to get ahead of it and use our organizations to try to help us figure out how. I think soil health. We've been talking about soil health for a number of years now. That's our new thing, and I think soil health is the way to go. And like I said, oh, by the way, it sequesters carbon. So what does that look like in a pasture situation, a grazing situation? I look at Bermuda grass, Bahia grass as they are monocultures of grass. Let's say that they're actively growing for 8 months out of the year. Really might be 6 or 7, but let's just say you get 8 months of growing season out. Right now they're dormant. Yes, that root is still alive, but that plant is dormant. So in the soil health model, we talk about something green and growing, 12 months out of the year, live active roots that are doing. Let me tell you, there is so much new information coming out about soil health, and most of it is from producers like yourselves. But there's so much that goes on in that soil underneath that that topsoil layer, that plant roots interacting with each other, what kind of roots interact with other type of roots, and passing sugar from one to the next, and the other one gives it back phosphorus, and just so many things that are going on underneath the soil that seemingly we never knew about. Kind of like the farming side. We thought we could just farm it and we could add in whatever we needed to add in. NP and K, maybe a little lime here and there if we needed to change the pH, maybe a little sulfur, but we thought we could add everything that soil needed from a sack. Not true. So the principles of soil health, there's things that are going on that we can't add from a sack, and we can't do from a management standpoint. It's those roots and those earthworms and all the microbes and the microbiology that's going on under there that is just it's fantastic. So I look at Bermuda and Bahia kind of like corn and cotton. It's a monoculture. It's growing for a little while, then it's gone, and then obviously Bermuda grass will come back. But can we do something in the cool season? Because we're not going to outcompete Bermuda and Bahia in the summer. Anything that we try to put on there, especially if we put just a little bit of fertilizer, that Bermuda's just going to respond and take it right up. Not always a lot of and we may get to that point later on that we find something, but right now I think our opportunity in grazing land is cool season, cover crops, trying to add something back into that soil. Our trick is that we have to remember that cover crop is there for a whole other purpose, not grazing. Now, if I get the opportunity and we have good moisture, we have the right conditions, by all means, let's graze it. But the end goal is putting organic matter back into the soil, and that means leaving some plant. That doesn't mean grazing it down to the ground. And that also means, and it sounds weird, again, we're the government, we're here to help. I'm going to tell you to kill that thing about this time of year. You know, so I'm going to tell you to run over that pasture and spray that cover crop and terminate it. Now, some people think that's okay as far as, you know, you hear some people that plant a ryegrass or a clover, they'll interseed it in their pasture, and, you know, it's going great guns in April, and then it dries off, and the Bermuda grass doesn't take off, and they'll say, well, that clover just stole all the moisture out of the soil. Not really true, you know, and I'll put back to the row crop folks that, you know, they find that, you know, ground that has cover crop on it, you know, in the dry conditions, let's say a dry spring, you know, that you get just as much, you know, germination or success or failure rate as if you had tilled it, because when you till it, you're just burning all that moisture up anyway, you know, so you turn it over, you till it, that moisture is gone too. So, if nothing else, it's a wash. But, you know, if we terminate that cover crop this time of year for us, then, you know, then we're gonna save some moisture and hopefully have a little moisture to get started. But, you know, the terminating the cover crop, letting some organic matter get back down into the soil, that is the purpose. You got to remember the purpose of doing something. The gravy or the ice cream on top of the cake is, could I graze it a few times? You know, December, January. Yeah, you know, make sure we got the growth on it. But that's the, you know, the nice part is, can we graze it a little bit? Yes. Can we graze the heck out of it? No. You know, is it going to do more for me later? Am I going to add more organic matter into the soil so that when July and August hit, I've stored, you know, I've raised the organic matter in the soil, I've stored some water in the soil, and now I can make it, you know, 2 weeks longer into that drought with good green grass than if I, you know, had my old system. So again, you got to, you know, think of the purpose, remember the purpose, and then if we get a little side benefit of grazing out of it, that's great too. So that's my, you know, that's kind of my thought, my vision for where I want, you know, us to go as NRCS. I'm really going to be promoting, you know, cover crops and in cropland. I want to promote, you know, cover crops in pasture land. Well, range health, you know, and get back into that, you know, the healthy range. The healthy range is one that's, you know, you have good grazing management on, you have diversity of plants, and that's, we always go back to that system. What did that prairie look like 200 years ago? You know, people talk about, you know, elk and buffalo. Yeah, we had elk and buffalo, you know, come through here, definitely in the high plains, you know, but they came through once. And they came through as a herd, and yeah, they beat the heck out of the ground. And they, you know, they ate everything down to the nub, but then they were gone for maybe a year or two, and they didn't come back around. And that stuff regenerated, regrew, and, you know, the diversity in the plants. If you get into a native range system, right now out there's, you know, there's vetch and there's some other winter annuals that are green and growing on a year-round basis. You get your, you know, your warm season grasses, your little blue stems and stuff that'll come out in the, you know, in the spring. And so that's that same cycle that we're looking for. You know, we're building organic matter. All those plants were dropping that leaf litter, you know, into the soil, and that organic matter was building up. And so that's, in any system that we're looking at, even in a cropland system, that's kind of where our mind goes in what we're trying to get back to build that healthy soil community underneath the ground. And then that's going to benefit us, you know, for all the stuff we want to utilize above the ground. So I'll stop talking. I think people have gotten up. I don't know if they're trying to run me off. We've got 4 of them now.